Welcome, everyone. I'm Kelly Zarnicki. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the president of the Young Adult Library Services Association. We are here this evening to honor our 2022 Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adult winner and finalists. I would like to take a moment to welcome the award-winning authors who are here with us this evening. We have our nonfiction winner, Gail Giro, and finalists, Amy Butler Green, Brandi Colbert, Paula Yu, and Don Brown. I am now going to hand the program over to YALSA's 2022 Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults Committee Chair, Alicia Abdul.
And it has to start that way, right? The pressure is off. Everybody can do the same thing where they start on mute and realize that they are. First awarded in 2010, YALSA's Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults was created to honor the year's best nonfiction book published for young adults. As said in the press release for our finalists in December, the committee's choices for the finalists should be celebrated for the new and veteran authors who researched and wrote these transformative stories, which highlight painful history and marginalized voices. Many of the considered titles did this, yet Brown, Colbert, Greenfield, Giro, and Yu's presentation of the content will deeply resonate with teens. We look forward to sharing them widely because of their broad appeal. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce my fellow committee members and thank them for their hard work. They are Ginny Edwards, Laura Graves Massey, who's not here tonight, Laura Hargrove, Yolanda Hood, Gina Manger, Michael Regala, Janet Weber, and Rebecca Weber. Our first nonfiction award of the evening goes to Amy Butler Greenfield, author of The Woman All Spies Fear, Codebreaker Elizabeth Smith Friedman and Her Hidden Life, published by Random House Studio, an imprint of Random House Children's Books, a division of Penguin Random House. With her work buried and credit given to others, female codebreaker Elizabeth Smith Friedman's life and accomplishments are given prime coverage. The book celebrates her intelligence, creativity, and tenacity during World War I and II and the legacy she leaves behind, filled with intrigue, spying, and ciphers. Amy, welcome. I'm now going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm honored to be here today. Elizabeth Smith Friedman was a superb codebreaker, and over the course of her long career, she solved mysteries, fought gangsters, and helped win 2 world wars. And part of what made her so good at her job was that she had an uncanny talent for spotting patterns. In writing about her, I spotted a pattern of my own: libraries. When telling her life story, Elizabeth almost always started with the Newberry Library in Chicago, where she met a millionaire who recruited her for his Shakespeare project. That was her first job in codebreaking. She made use of that millionaire's own library to learn more about codes and ciphers. At one point, she took a job as a librarian in her hometown. Later on, she and her husband, William, also a codebreaker, created their own personal library, which became the single best private collection on codebreaking in America. At the end of their lives, they left that collection, including most of their own papers, photos, and letters, to yet another library, the Marshall Library of Lexington, Virginia. Libraries were essential in Elizabeth's life, and they are in mine too. Writing this book was a years-long odyssey, one I could not have undertaken without the help of librarians near and far. My most heartfelt thanks go to Paul Barron and Melissa Davis at the Marshall Library. Paul Barron kept the library open late for me because I was coming all the way from England. He also made sure I took breaks. The papers I read there were astonishing. Among them, an emotional diary, exquisite love letters, and a truly devastating doctor's report. I could hardly bear to leave those papers, even to eat lunch, but Paul made sure I did, sometimes by taking me to lunch himself. Later, when COVID lockdowns made another visit impossible, Melissa Davis helped me track down all the things that I still needed, including the wonderful photos that we put in the book. Most of all, I thank them both for taking such good care of Elizabeth's papers. Our country is now locked in battles about what history can be told and how we should tell it. I believe we must tell the truth, even if it overturns what we thought we knew, even if it makes us uncomfortable. And we must back up what we say with evidence. The papers in the Marshall Library, as well as the records preserved by other librarians, are what made it possible for me to tell the truth about Elizabeth's life. I'm grateful to many other people, among them my husband and daughter who read drafts of the book and who brought me to code breaking in the first place. My agent, Sarah Crow, who believed in this project through all its many stages. My editor, Lee Wade, who asked great questions and responded to my own queries with warmth and good sense and amazing speed. Unflappable Charlotte Roos, who assisted with everything. Wonderful designer, Andrea Lau, who helped me hide a cipher in the book. And the superb team of copy editors and proofreaders who helped me check every footnote and every letter and all those ciphers again and again and again. The point of all that editing and checking, of course, was to deliver the book to readers. And that brings me back full circle to libraries again. I am more grateful than I can say to all the librarians who have championed this book, especially the YALSA Excellence in Nonfiction Committee. Thank you for putting in so many, many unsung hours, reading and rereading and discussing the wealth of great YA nonfiction that came out in 2021. I am honored that The Woman Allspice Beer was among the finalists. And at a time when the teaching and the reading of history are under threat, I am thankful for everything that YALSA does to support YA nonfiction and to help connect our books with readers. My warmest thanks to you all.
Thank you, Amy. Our next nonfiction award goes to Brandi Colbert, author of Blackbirds in the Sky, the story and legacy of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, published by Balzer and Bray, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers. Colbert contextualizes the Tulsa Race Massacre, which had its 100th year anniversary this year to commemorate the harrowing events using her skillful writing for teen audiences, a well-researched accounting of the racial violence that cannot be forgotten. Welcome, Brandi.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here in the company of you all. So I am going to start now. As a young girl who dreamed of one day being a published author, I never thought I would write a history book. It hadn't taken long for me to understand that United States history, as it was taught in school and as it was written in textbooks, was not meant for me or people who looked like me. If one didn't know better, they would assume, based on this curriculum, that Black Americans had no real history outside of enslavement and the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. I recently participated in a panel of all Black women authors, and we were asked if, when we were teenagers, we had known much about the topics of the nonfiction books we would go on to write as adults. The answer was just about no's all around, or if we had heard anything about these people or events growing up, it was overwhelmingly negative anecdotes or surface level knowledge that never got down to the root of the subject. This was true of myself and the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. I cannot recall exactly when I first heard about the massacre, but I do remember being surprised that such a devastating event had happened in a town I'd always felt safe visiting. It would be years later that I began to connect the dots between Tulsa's predominantly white demographics and the fact that my own hometown of Springfield, Missouri, just 3 hours away, was only 3% Black when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. A triple lynching of Black men over Easter weekend in 1906 sent the Black community of my hometown fleeing in the early 20th century, while the arrest of a young Black man and a white mob's threat to lynch him were the catalyst for the Tulsa Race Massacre that occurred just 15 years later. The Greenwood district in Tulsa was a thriving Black neighborhood located in the north, which was created out of exhaustion from oppressive Jim Crow laws, the need for a community that supported one another, and the desire to keep Black prosperity growing within that community. While Black Americans have long been known to make a way out of no way, I was particularly struck by the sheer resilience of Black Tulsans after the destruction of their homes and businesses, and in some cases, the tragic loss of family members and friends who were murdered by a violent white mob. Despite being denied reparations, as well as enduring multiple attempts by public officials and insurance companies to sabotage their future, the residents of Greenwood immediately worked to rebuild what they had lost. Even in the aftermath of so much violence and the refusal of a city and state to properly acknowledge and apologize for what had happened, they simply wanted their community back. A sense of community is what compelled me to finally write a history book. While I greatly admire activists, I had never considered myself one. To me, activism had always meant organizing and marching and putting oneself on the front lines of causes to engender change. I didn't understand for quite some time that activism comes in many forms, and that the best method for me is to incorporate history into my work for young people. To research, write, and share the often hidden, sometimes buried history of Black Americans is one of the most radical things I can do, especially now in an era where people who believe it is inappropriate to teach children the true story of this country are mobilizing to ban works that unapologetically present factually accurate accounts. I will always believe children deserve the whole truth, and I will never stop striving to share it. I could not have written this book without the support of so many wonderful people. I'm immensely grateful to the entire team at HarperCollins and Balzer and Bray, who worked so hard to beautifully package this book and get the word out to schools, libraries, and booksellers. My editor, Jordan Brown, and my agent, Tina Dubois, are two brilliant people I am proud to know, and I'm so grateful for the care and support they've provided every step of the way, from the spark of an idea to a finished book. Their belief in me was a bright spot while I wrote this book during the tumultuous year of 2020. Thank you to my family, especially my mom, for your love and for allowing me to share some of our own history in the foreword. Thank you to YALSA and the Excellence in Nonfiction Award Committee for recognizing Blackbirds in the Sky and for elevating a wide range of books that also share the truth about events and people that should always be remembered. I am honored to be in the company of Gail, Paula, Amy, and Dawn. And finally, I want to thank everyone who has picked up a copy of my book, talked about my book, and shared my book with young people. Thank you for taking the time to sit with these difficult truths and for working to make a more inclusive, honest future. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandi. Paula Yu, author of From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, The Killing of Vincent Chin and the Trial That Galvanized the Asian American Movement, published by Norton Young Readers, an imprint of W.W. Norton and Company. Yu weaves an emotional story within a story of a movement that began after the death of Vincent Chin, a Chinese American at the hands of two white men. The book follows the chain of events and trial, simultaneously capturing the country's treatment of Asians and their efforts to overcome it. I would like to welcome Paula.
Thank you very much. When I visited my parents' house several years ago, I found a box filled with my old drawings from elementary school, and I smiled at the cute images of myself in kindergarten with my black hair and dark eyes. But as I flipped through the pages, I noticed something was off. The drawings of me with black hair and dark eyes were soon replaced with blue eyes and blonde hair. I was holding a tangible piece of evidence in my hands as to why representation matters, not just in books, but in our schools. Looking back, I realized how little, if any, Asian American Pacific Islander literature and history had been taught in depth when I was growing up. Although I was born and raised in America, This erasure explained why I felt like an outsider for most of my life, because my voice, my experience, and my history was erased from this society. I felt cheated. I had lost a valuable part of not just my childhood, but my identity, and I had the drawings to prove it. This lack of access and erasure of Asian American stories in our education can have devastating and even fatal results. Anti-Asian hate crimes have been skyrocketing since the start of the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic in the United States. As of September 2021, more than 10,000 pandemic-related incidents of anti-Asian physical and verbal harassment crimes, including several deaths, have been reported. I myself have been verbally harassed and called chink and other racist slurs because of this pandemic. What hurt the most was when two parents pulled their child away from me, afraid I might infect him. But we all fought back. Our protests across the country soon led to President Biden signing the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law on May 20th, 2021, just 2 days after what would have been Vincent Chin's 66th birthday. Vincent Chin was the subject of my latest young adult narrative nonfiction book, From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, The Killing of Vincent Chin and the Trial That Galvanized the Asian American Movement, published by Norton Young Readers. My book is about the 1982 manslaughter death of a Chinese American man killed during a wave of anti-Asian racism influenced by mass layoffs in the auto industry due to competition from Japanese import cars. Vincent Chin's case would become the first federal civil rights trial for an Asian American, and his name became a symbol for anti-Asian racism. Soon after the 2021 COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act was passed, Illinois and New Jersey became the first two states to mandate Asian American Pacific Islander history in K-12 public schools. California recently passed a law requiring K-12 ethnic studies to be taught as well. New York and several other states are now working on similar legislation. So let's take a step back and look at the toxic and tangible results of what happens when Asian American Pacific Islander history is not taught in our schools. What happens when we are erased? A recent survey reported that 1 out of 4 Asian American youth reported experiencing anti-Asian physical and verbal harassment and bullying because of the pandemic. That statistic breaks my heart. Think about it. What if this whole time AAPI history was already being taught in depth in all K-12 classrooms across the country? Instead of 1 out of 4 Asian American children and teenagers being bullied because of this pandemic, perhaps that number could have been 0. This is why I write Asian American nonfiction books for young readers. I do not want children growing up like me, unaware of our contributions to this country, to our country. Thank you to the YALSA Excellence in Nonfiction Committee for this honor. I am grateful for your advocacy for our young readers. It is a privilege to be amongst the company of Amy, Brandi, Don, and Gail. Thank you to my editor, Simon Botten, along with Kristen Allard, Golda Rademacher, Daisy Glasgow, and everyone at Norton Young Readers. Thank you to my agent and friend, Tricia Lawrence, and Erin Murphy, Dennis Stevens, and everyone at the Erin Murphy Literary Agency. And thank you to my publicist, Carolyn Sun of Sun Literary Arts. It was truly an honor to interview Vincent Chin's family and friends, the activists who fought for his justice, the lawyers involved in the case, and everyone who provided access and guidance during my research for this book. And finally, thank you to my family, friends, and my husband, Kyle, and our 3 cats who kept me smiling during the writing of this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Our next award goes to Don Brown, author of In the Shadow of the Fallen Towers, The Seconds, Minutes, Hours, Days, Weeks, Months, and Years After the 9/11 Attacks, published by Etch, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishing. For a new generation living in a post-9/11 era, Brown writes and illustrates the events of the terrorist attack immediately after not only at Ground Zero, but the country and military operations abroad. With a style that befits the mood, the combination of words and art shines. Welcome, Don.
Hi, everybody. How are you? I want to thank Elsa, and I would like to thank Alicia, Ginny, Laura, and Laura, Yolanda, Gina, Mike, Janet, and Rebecca for honoring In the Shadow of the Falling Towers. I'd also like to thank my wife for putting up with a difficult husband. And of course, I want to thank Kate O'Sullivan and Whitney Leader Pacone, my partners at Clarion. It is their book as much as it is mine. You know, writing is a solitary occupation, and just getting noticed is a thrill. Being praised and celebrated, I'm over the moon. And being associated with a group of writers like Amy and Paula and Brandi and Gail is an absolute honor. Their deft and expert craftsmanship is a benchmark for any nonfiction author to aspire to. I especially admire their commitment to an honest dialogue with the past. That's what writing history is, teasing out answers to the who, the when, the where of history, and more importantly, and more difficultly, the how and the why of it. It's an ongoing and never-ending conversation. New facts are uncovered, or novel interpretations of old ones are to be considered. We should all remember, history is never settled. It's all revisionist. No matter how much that may make you uncomfortable, or how much that upends your pre-existing prejudices. In any case, thank you again for your kind and generous praise.
Thank you, Don. Our final award of the evening goes to our 2022 Award for Excellence in Nonfiction winner, Gail Jarrow, for her book, Ambushed, The Assassination Plot Against President Garfield, published by Calkins Creek, an imprint of Astra Books for young readers. An intricately detailed narrative of the assassination of President Garfield, Jarrow uses historical documents, newspaper accounts, and diary entries to create an engaging chronology of events as part of her medical fiasco series. I am pleased to welcome Gail.
Thank you for everybody on the committee for choosing Ambushed as the winner of the Excellence in Nonfiction Award. It's an enormous honor to be recognized by Elsa. This award is special because it affirms the vital role of nonfiction in the lives of teens as a source of information, inspiration, comfort, and entertainment. And as today's events remind us, history is instructive and worth knowing. I'm grateful to you librarians and teachers for sharing nonfiction with young readers. I'm also honored to be among such fine authors, Amy, Brandi, Don, and Paula. We have written about different moments in history. We have used different approaches, but we all wrote our books because we believed the stories were important to tell. Ambushed is the second in my medical fiasco series. Like many of my books, it combines history and medicine. The history element shines the light on one of our least known presidents, James Garfield, who was elected in 1880, just shy of his 49th birthday. Garfield didn't sit back and let life happen to him. He worked hard to improve himself and his prospects. He rose from rural poverty to the presidency in large measure because of, as he put it himself, his hunger and thirst for knowledge. He had very few books when he was growing up, but once he had access to libraries, he read widely, eager to absorb as much as possible. When he first arrived at Williams College at age 22, he wrote his mother, "There are 25,000 books in the libraries here within a few feet of me, so I can have all the books to read I want." As librarians know, books open the world to a reader. Garfield accomplished a great deal in his life, but he never reached his full potential because he served just 200 days as president. For 80 of those, he was in bed with a bullet in his back. His fate was tragic. It stunned the nation. But his assassination ultimately led to significant changes in politics and government and medicine. I was drawn to this project by the medical angle and its relevance to today. Garfield's doctors were considered gunshot wound experts because of their experience during the Civil War, but they hadn't kept up with the advancements in medicine. 14 years before Garfield was shot, Joseph Lister, a surgeon in Scotland, had shown the value of an antiseptic care. He had even traveled to the US to prove to skeptical American surgeons that microbes caused infection and that antiseptic methods prevented it. But the president's doctors remained unconvinced. This doomed James Garfield. His well-publicized suffering during the summer of 1881 helped to propel the American medical community into the 20th century. That has saved countless lives from the ravages of lethal infections. I dedicated Ambush to my granddaughter. For Petra, may you face a world with fewer medical fiascos. She was born in November 2019 as COVID was beginning to spread, even though the world didn't realize it yet. Her entire life has been under the pandemic cloud. We are coping with a shocking medical fiasco. Nearly 6 million dead worldwide so far, probably more uncounted. Hundreds of millions of people sickened. Some of them will suffer lingering consequences we don't even know for how long. The young affected as their development, education, and social lives were upended. The reason I write about the history of medicine is to say to teens, don't despair. We have been through dark moments before. Even the most tragic medical fiascos can lead to progress. History provides hope. I want to thank everyone at Calkins Creek who helped me turn my manuscript into this finished book, from copy editing to design and production to marketing. My greatest appreciation goes to my longtime editor, Carolyn Yoder, who shepherded my work through this process. For many years, I have benefited from her support, knowledge, and skill. Finally, thanks to my husband, Robert, for steadfastly encouraging my writing career, keeping me company on research trips, and listening and commenting as I read an early draft aloud so that I can hear the flow of the words. While writing a manuscript usually feels like a solitary endeavor, producing a book is a team effort. Thank you all.
Thank you. And I'll take a moment to recognize all of our finalists and winner. So a little round of applause. We are now, and you are also fantastic. It's half an hour on the dot. So we've got a half an hour to talk a little bit with some Q&A. If there's any other questions that anybody wants to drop in the chat, for sure, but we've got a few prepared. So we'll dive in. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can with the time remaining. So our first question is from the SLJ hosted finalist celebration. Don had said he can't live without bibliographies. Can you explain your process, everybody, not just Don, for keeping all of your sources and notes organized? And peeking behind the curtain a bit, when you're submitting a draft to a publisher, what requirements and process exist when it's nonfiction? Don, do you want to start because it's your quote?
There's a lot in there. You know, if you're digging around for facts, you have to love a bibliography because, you know, it's the roots of the subject keep going out and out and out, and you know, as you follow from one book to another, and their bibliographies, and sometimes just even the collection themselves points to a different a direction that particular author took. You know, just their sources. So I always find that fascinating. Keeping sources, I'm not great at that. If I could, I'd turn the computer, you could see a pile of papers and books in a stack, and I go through them with all the all the intent of a monkey trying to work a Swiss Army knife. So I'm probably not the best one you should ask here. I'm not great at it. And I'll be fascinated how everybody else does it, because I'm looking for advice too. Ladies, please, one of you jump in.
I'll jump in with some show and tell real quick at that.
Okay.
So Post-its. I love Post-its. And wait, I forgot. I meant to pull this out earlier. If you give me a second, it's behind the curtain here. I'm really into binders. So these are all the court case transcripts for the Vincent Chin trial, and I would, use the highlighter, and then I would type it into my electronic file, on the computer. I sound so old. Electronic file on the computer. So that way I had it both here, but because sometimes it just helps to have it tangible. There's something about actually touching paper that helps me remember it more. So I use the binders. I use the old-fashioned system, but then I type up everything, and I recommend Scrivener. I could not have gotten any of these books done without Scrivener. It's an incredible writing tool, software. It takes a little bit of a learning curve to use, but it's invaluable. And so that's what I do. And that way I can electronically look up stuff or look up stuff there. And I will say that for me, in terms of taking notes and footnoting and bibliography, whenever I found that one killer money quote, or that just one thing that either was a great anecdote or a great emotion, revealed great emotion in the nonfiction that I'm doing, I just stop. And I would either write it down or I'd keep it in a file on my computer, and I would say, if there's one thing that you have to have published, has to be this quote, or it has to be this one thing. So that always, I think it's a little bit like cooking, where you put things in a colander and what remains left, it's kind of like that. That was a terrible example, but because it's the broth that matters. But I think that's what it is. Yeah, it's the broth. So you get rid of all the leftover stuff. So that's kind of my messy madness of how I take notes.
It doesn't sound messy and madness to me.
Well, let me kind of agree with Paula about the way that physically dealing with paper helps you remember. I have found that I really do need the physical process of taking notes with a pen on paper. I keep a running bibliography, and I'm very meticulous about tying my notes to the bibliography and the entry there. If I'm using books, I'm writing notes on a piece of paper. If I'm using PDF, like of an old magazine, I print it out and I highlight it and make notes in the margin. And the other benefit, not just how writing helps me absorb it, but later I can cut the paper apart and put it in the appropriate chapter, because that's how I do it. I'll have pile for this chapter, this chapter, this chapter, and it helps me organize visually. I don't get to the computer till I'm ready to write my first draft. Everything else is on paper. And you ask about submitting it. My editor, Carolyn Yoder, is really fussy about documentation. So if I have a quote that's going to be in the book and in the source notes, I must send her a physical copy of that quote in the source. And during copy editing, it's checked, she checks it. And also, I have to keep track of the source of every piece of information, because she may ask me later when she fact checks, where did this come from? And I have to be able to go right to that spot and produce that fact. So keeping notes, keeping organized is critical.
Well, I'm definitely taking notes myself, because I feel more like Dawn. I just had no idea what was going on most of the time. With my fiction, I don't, because this is my first nonfiction book. So I'm used to writing fiction and not outlining and just kind of like letting it go. And that, of course, is not the case with a nonfiction book. So I did have to outline, but I wish I had had more of a streamlined process when it came to keeping track of, the bibliography, all the sources. I honestly just had like a big Word document with a bunch of links and highlights and notes in all caps to myself. And then, had to go back to that sort of at the end and make sense of it. And it was really actually pretty stressful. So I really like hearing what Gail and Paula have done. And I think I'm going to try to use more like physical paper next time, because that really sounds like a good way to stay organized. As for submitting it, I turned in the draft, and generally my editor, if he just had some questions about things that maybe seemed like a little off or didn't seem like they were right, he would ask me to follow up on that. And so then I'd have to go back and check my notes. But I was really concerned about the copy editing, fact checking phase, because that's what I do. Also, I'm a freelance copy editor and fact checker, and I know how difficult that is. So I wanted to make everything as easy for them as possible when I did turn in my source notes, but also knew what a difficult job, that was just going to be for everyone. So I would say for me, that was actually the source notes bibliography was one of the hardest parts, but I do love looking at everybody else's.
Well, I think there's always so much to learn from other people's ways of doing research. I've never had a research discussion where I haven't learned something. I think, I'm different from most. I'm disabled in a way that makes it very difficult for me to, carry and lift very large binders, even to write for very long. And so my process is almost entirely with the computer. I also had an enormous amount of material with this, even just from the archive visits alone. I think by the end, I had somewhere close to 50,000 words worth of notes, as well as hundreds of photographs of documents, photos of photos, photos of maps. So just an enormous amount of material to organize. And in addition, I had hundreds of pages of declassified files to go through. Just we're talking many thousands of pages here. So organizing that was a challenge. But I think in a sense, because my process is so much online, that was a very big help. I thought about using database software, but what I did this time around was to organize things more through documents and just make sure that I knew where every document was, and putting things that were the declassified files and sticking those together, sticking the oral histories together, making sure that then I could search through those files. That was very important to me. And then it's a matter of then making sure you have other documents that tell you, for any time I was about to write a chapter, I would just go through and just list everything I wanted to cover, where the source was, so that as I went along, I can just write. What I like to do is write a couple of pages and then go back down and source every single thing. By the time I was done, my book has over 750 footnotes in it. And I have to give so much credit to my editor and to all of those people who were checking facts, just going through line by line with this with me. I honestly thought at some point somebody would say, that's it, you can only have so many footnotes and we're cutting the rest. But they didn't. They were absolutely marvelous. At one point, there were 4 or 5 people on a discussion about how to handle particularly tricky problems, and people gave so much to that. And I think part of why they do is that if you're in this business of nonfiction, you understand that this is the essence of what we do, that we say things and then we allow the reader to go and look and find out where we got this from and check it themselves, so they don't have to take our word for it. The history is not a matter of you read it and you either believe or you don't believe. You get to look at it yourself. You get to check it. You get to go find those documents and make sense of this. And every time I talk with students about this, I talk about that being part of history. It's so important that they understand they can be part of this process. So my process is constantly evolving as just the process of research has become so much more online than it used to be. And the wonderful thing about that for the students is that it opens up the number of sources they can see. They can go and look at these files themselves often on the internet and figure things out for themselves.
It's like I set you up because that's the perfect segue to the next question. So we want to know what compelled you to write for a young adult audience rather than a children's or an adult audience for your topic.
Well, I'll go first. I used to teach middle school, and I have been writing for this age group for years. I like middle school and up because the kids have had enough history and science that they can understand and relate to whatever I'm writing about. They needed sort of a minimum understanding before I could present these topics. So I think that's a big part of why I write for this age group. Also, I like to develop characters, and I like to go into scientific detail, and that requires words. So I need a lot more words than I would use for a younger age group. But despite that, I have a lot of images in my books, photographs, illustrations from historical periodicals, for example, primary sources like a diary or a letter. And practically every spread of Ambushed has an image. So combined with the caption that I write about these images and the image itself, really the book can be appropriate for a wide range of ages and reading abilities.
I can go. So, I grew up, I talk about this in the foreword of my book, but I grew up really, really hating history class. It was really upsetting to only hear about, negative aspects of your culture and, your ancestors. And so I didn't realize until I was in my 20s, once I started just like researching stuff on my own and slowly realizing like these rabbit holes I would go into on the internet were actually like, it was history that I was interested in, and that there was so much that I hadn't been taught. And just thinking how valuable that would have been as a young person to know about all of these influential, Black Americans who came before me and who, had a hand in so many important, events in this country. And so it's just so important to me to really like pass on that knowledge to younger people and try to get them as interested, as early as they can be in these topics. I just think it makes such a difference to know this at an early age. And yeah, that's why I do it.
Well, I started, I'm sorry, you want to go?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. I started out doing history for picture books, biographies for younger kids, mainly because I was really writing for my children at the time. And as they got older, I wanted to keep on writing for them until eventually they became young adults, and I would write for them. Now they're adults, so it's a whole other story. Combined with that is my fascination with the magic of words and pictures brought together, because I think there is a magic. No, I don't think it. I know it is. I can guarantee it is. And if you'd like to argue this with me, take a Peanuts cartoon strip, make a copy of it. In one, white out the words. In the others, white out the pictures. Look at the picture. Look at the words individually. There's nothing. Together, they're literally $1 billion business. So words and pictures joined together are magic. So I'm constantly trying to capture that magic for all kind of readers, combined with my fascination with history. I've always loved it. I've always found it fascinating. I always found it filled with high drama. And I couldn't understand why people didn't like it. So I'm always trying to share my passion of history with them. Like I said, I did picture books for a while, and then I kind of stumbled into graphic novels. And I just want to give credit to where credit is due. Art Spiegelman, Mouse. He gave me a career. He gave many, many graphic artists a career because prior to Mouse, most people didn't believe that a graphic novel, a comic book, could handle all sorts of weighty subject matter. And he proved them wrong. And in spite of them trying to ban his book, he's a genius and he should be required reading everywhere. So I'm lucky enough to follow in his wake. And I'm lucky enough to have editors who will go along with my thoughts and my passions. Also, wait, I just want to change something entirely here for a second. Just the incestuous nature of this business. One of the first persons I ever worked for was Carolyn Yoder when she worked for a magazine called Cobblestone. And I've done several books with Simon Bowden. So it's like we're all kind of related.
That's great. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It's a small world. Well,
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in real quick and say, I already talked about why I write for young readers. You already heard that in my speech, but I wanted to add that I do a lot of different types of writing. I just noticed in the Q&A, someone asked if I was a staff writer on the West Wing. And yes, when I'm not doing books, I'm a TV writer, producer, and I also write novels. And, you know, I do it. I like to write, and I write picture books as well, nonfiction. But I wanted to add the reason why I wrote the Vincent Chin book for young adults, and why my next book that sold is also a narrative young adult nonfiction book, is because I just realized no matter what I'm writing for, whether it's the West Wing or a picture book or whatever it is, it's always about character for me. It's always about what motivates the character to do what they're doing, what motivates them on their journey. And a lot of that comes from your childhood or from when you were a teenager. And what I loved about working on Vincent Chin and the new book that I'm working on is I don't just interview people when I can about the event that I'm writing about. I also go, what were you like as a kid? What were you in sports as in high school? What was your personality like? Because I find that teen readers really identify when they know that the scientist that you're interviewing or the politician or, you know, the lawyer or whatever, like what drove them, their passions and what led to them becoming their passion in life as an adult. And so I think that you can do that more with young adult and children's nonfiction than you can with adult nonfiction. And so that's, I think, why it appeals to me, because it's always about what happened to you at 5 stays with you for the rest of your life or when you're 15. And I find that just a really beautiful, profound thing that we should celebrate. So I just want to add that.
I started writing this book because of a question my daughter asked. She was about 8 years old. She was fascinated by code breaking. We've taken her to Bletchley, which is near us. We've gone to a number of different code breaking exhibitions. And we came out of one of them and she turned to me and she said, "Mommy, were there any girl code breakers?" And my heart broke a little. And I did stop and kneel down and got right direct with her and said, yes, there were. And I started to tell her about some of them. I had happened to know something about Elizabeth Friedman. So I started with her and I thought, there ought to be a book for young readers about her. So right from the start, I knew that this was not going to be a book for adults. I have written for adults as well, but I knew that that was not the driving force for me behind this book. But it took quite a while for me to find the right form. And I had an 8-year-old. I first started thinking really young. And it was actually the content of the material, the research that I was doing. Some of the earliest sources about Elizabeth, we don't have much about her childhood. I was able painstakingly to reconstruct some of it, but she didn't want to talk about it, which always means as a historian, you just start digging, because that's often where a lot of important stuff is. And the more you don't want to talk about it, often the more important it is. But her life, as far as she liked to tell her story, really did begin when she was in her early 20s. And there is a college diary as well that's full of a lot of emotion. But it's beyond really what would work and be something that an 8-year-old could comprehend. And also it was, as I got deeper and deeper into this, it was what drew me in. And I could just feel that, no, this was an older story. And I'd been trying to make it work maybe as a middle grade. And I told my agent, I said, I just feel the story wants to be older. And she said, tell it the way you want. And I said, I think that's what I have to do. And I just started over again. And that's where it all came pouring out. So that's how I found it, was partly by design, but partly by just letting the story sink into me till I knew it well enough that I knew how to tell it.
I think we'll do one more question to kind of wrap it up, and very apropos for some of the things that are happening currently. All of your books deal with some kind of catastrophic event. So we wanted to know, how did you balance the event of the story with the people of the story that you wanted to write about?
I'll go. Ambushed is about the assassination of James Garfield and the aftermath of that. But for a teen to really care about Garfield, I had to explain who he was and tell about him. So the first part of my book is about Garfield and his life. And because I'm trying to engage a teen reader, I did spend time on Garfield's teen years. And to do that, I used his diary entries. But another aspect of Garfield that I could use was the fact that he had 5 children, and 3 of them were teens during the assassination period. 2 of them, a son and daughter, kept diaries at that point in their lives. So by using that to tell my readers how they felt about their papa being shot and trying to recover, I hope to involve a reader in a life of somebody who lived many, many, many years ago.
I'll pop in real quick and just say there are 3 things about dealing with a very dark story about a man who was beaten to death with a baseball bat, and the larger issues of toxic masculinity and racism, whether or not it was racist or not, it's still, at the end of the day, the killers were found not guilty. So it's still a very controversial case. But I just wanted to say 3 things. Everybody I interviewed cried or got upset during the interview. And I realized in that moment, they were not remembering what happened. They were reliving it. I was witnessing trauma. So that was very important to me to remember how to honor the pain that they were going through, and to understand, how do I go beyond the pain and show the positive, what hope, because otherwise you don't want to read my book. That's depressing. It's what hope can I give, especially for young readers? And that's when I found Jared Liu, who was the son of Vincent Chin's fiance, Vicky Wong. And he was going through survivor guilt because he would not be alive today had Vincent Chin not been killed, because his fiance ended up marrying someone else and having Jared. And so finding his story gave me hope, because there was a fresh way of looking at this story and saying, this is how it's relevant to today's youth. And finally, I want to end by saying I'm the first writer to meet the man who killed Vincent Chin, Ronald Ebens, at his house in person since Michael Moore interviewed him in 1987. And although that interview was ultimately off the record, I cried in the car afterwards, because I realized for the first time, compassion, anger, and justice are not mutually exclusive. Could I feel angry for what he did? Could I feel furious that justice was not accomplished? Of course. Could I still feel compassion for a human being who has also suffered all this time and has expressed remorse? Of course I can. And that was a big learning experience for me. And that's something that I tried to imbue in my book, because we can write about very dark stuff, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I just want to say, I think it's a shame, and I think it's wrong, and I think it's disgusting what's going on right now in our country in terms of trying to suppress the truth. And we have to understand that in order to see the beauty in our country and the beauty in our history, we have to confront the ugly. That's how we can find at the end compassion and beauty, and we can move forward together.
Well said, Paula. For me, it was a really unique challenge, I think, writing about something that happened 100 years ago, and that was actively trying, people actively tried to bury it for decades after it happened. But it was really important to, while I'm presenting this, massacre, this real tragedy, to also talk about the people, who, some survivors, and then some people who were killed during this, to really put, names and faces to this event. I think often it's really easy to look at events in history and just say, well, yeah, that was sad. This whole community was attacked and people died and, people lost their lives. But like, I wanted to talk about who are these people, who is this Dr. A.C. Jackson, who was called like the most able, Black surgeon by the Mayo brothers, who founded the Mayo Clinic, back in the 1920s. And to talk about the people who owned the businesses in the Greenwood district. Excuse me. So I wanted to get as detailed as possible as I could with the event. And then also at the beginning of each chapter in my book, there are quotes from survivors that were collected by the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation. And it was just really heartbreaking to read their quotes and go through them. These are people who were, elderly, I would say, I guess, by the time, they talked about their experience, but they were children and babies when it happened. And I just really wanted to give them a voice. These are people whose stories were hidden for so long. And so though there weren't many records for me, unfortunately, to access, anytime I found, a quote from a survivor or a cool story, like about this sort of legend, Peg Leg Taylor, who supposedly just like sat on this hill and just like, held back a mob, for hours by himself. It was really important for me to put that in there and just give some humanity to this event.
I'm not quite sure how I should answer the question. If you look at all my graphic novels, really, they're a collection of vignettes strung together to create a larger narrative. And across each vignette, I try to have a person or people to use as the vehicle to move the narrative along, and also to highlight that narrative moment in history. But the difficulty, well, not the difficulty, but my work is doing that weird choreograph between image and word, because I can use images to carry the story along. Although I always like the images to buttress the text, like if I was going to draw a picture of a World War I airplane, you wouldn't be able to rebuild that airplane from my image. So the more of the truth lies in the text than in the imagery. But having said that, the two put together, as I mentioned before, creates a kind of a magic. And with that magic, I try to portray the drama and the importance and the pathos of the moment. And as I do that from vignette to vignette to vignette, I hope by the end, I've told a larger story through the experiences of many different people.
I would like to echo all that's been said here about looking for that strand of hope, but looking for it by paying close attention to the story you are telling, to the people who are in it, to what they suffered and what they went through. The story I was telling involved 2 world wars. It involved threats from the mob. It involved terrible anti-Semitism and a price paid by 2 people who had to keep their work secret from each other, had to keep the discrimination that they suffered at their work secret as well. It was all part of the package, and they paid that price because they felt they were keeping their country safe. But it was something that caused them great suffering. And Elizabeth Friedman saved that library, spent years making sure everything was documented because she wanted in the end for the secrets to come out, for the truth to come out. She believed the truth will set you free. And I think that that is part of what moved me so deeply about her story. I think that it's something that she believed, that I believe, that the truth is essential. We have to get to the truth. We have to look beyond the secrets and find out what really happened. And we have to be willing to talk about that. And that's something that we have to do for our country to move forward. I've been so heartened tonight to hear everyone's thoughts and hopes for how we can do that. I think it's one of the most important issues we're facing right now. I'm very glad to be facing it in the company of everyone we've heard tonight.
So well said. And it was an honor and a pleasure to host. Go ahead, Don.
Alicia, I was just gonna, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, it's just from everybody else. Do you guys have books on the way out or subjects you're working on? I'd love to know what's going on with everybody.
Well, I can sum mine up very quickly because I am working on another code breaking story, but it is hush hush at the moment. So I can't say
Okay.
much about it.
It's allowed to be hush hush.
Well, my next book is American Murderer, The Parasite That Haunted the South, which is coming out in September. It's the third in my Medical Fiasco series. This is The American Murderer, which is the English translation of the scientific name for the hookworm that infected millions of people in the American South and sapped their energy and life. And this is the story of how scientists, doctors, government, financed by John D. Rockefeller, tackled that medical fiasco.
Nice. I'm going back to fiction for a few books. So I know, I think that almost broke me. No, I definitely want to do more nonfiction in the future, but I have some novels lined up. So my next one is, the working title is The Blackwoods, and it is this kind of family saga of this Black Hollywood family, going back to like the great-great-grandmother would have been, playing maids in Hollywood. And then it's told from 3 different points of view, 2 cousins in contemporary times. And then there's flashbacks to their great-grandmother, who actually was like a contemporary of Dorothy Dandridge and kind of lived that kind of Hollywood life. Yeah, so I don't know, I'm working on it now. I don't know when it'll be out, maybe next year. But I'm excited about it. And it does have some historical stuff in it. So I will be doing my research still, don't worry.
Oh, all these books sound great. And I'll just wrap up by saying my next book is called Rising from the Ashes, also being published by Norton Young Readers, coming out in the fall of 2023. And it is about the 1992 Los Angeles uprising, also known back in the day as the LA riots. And it's being told specifically from the point of view of what happened to the destruction and rebirth of Koreatown, because I'm Korean American, but I'm also going to be taking a very honest and in-depth look at the relationship between the Korean American and Black communities and our steps towards solidarity and the resilience of both our communities and our families.
And then Don, you have to answer your own
Oh,
question.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I should. I have a couple of books coming out. I have a middle reader graphic novel about the history of democracy, the ups and downs of American democracy. And if I'm lucky, it'll be banned. And then I have another book coming about for older kids about how Jewish youth managed to escape the Holocaust. And they'll both be coming out in, well, Democracy book will come out in 22 and the Holocaust book will come out in 23.
Wonderful. Well, I know Kelly is going to come back on in just a second, but on behalf of YALSA, I sincerely thank all of you for joining us and celebrating this year's finalist and winner.
Alicia, that's all I have. I don't have anything else for closing. So, yep.
Did
you're
I
it.
steal your thunder? Was that supposed to be you? All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much. It was
Thank
great.
you.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you to the
you.
committee and Alicia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.